Back in the early 2000s, you couldn't talk about film without somebody mentioning how American Beauty was a masterpiece. Forget the fact that it won Best Picture, Best Screenplay, Best Director, and a bunch of other meaningless awards. Its impact on cinema and pop culture was everywhere you went. TV shows were referencing it, movies were influenced by it, audiences and critics were dissecting every piece of symbolism they could shove up their ass. To put it simply, the movie was an instant classic, pretty much as close as you can get to universally adored. But today, it's a steaming pile of crap. Or at least that's what the critics say. Personally, I think it's a pretty great movie. But the general perception of the film today is pretty much the exact opposite of what it was in 1999. Today, critics across the board feel pretty emboldened to talk shit about American Beauty. They say it was never good. I've even seen claims that it's the worst movie to win Best Picture of all time, which is just like, I don't know. It's basically become the opposite of a cult classic. See, with most cult classic films, they'll usually fail upon initial release, but then slowly garner a dedicated audience over time, until eventually they become retroactively remembered as great films that were misunderstood. But American Beauty is the opposite. It's a reverse cult classic. It was understood at the time, but then slowly it lost respect over the years until eventually it's now retroactively remembered as a mediocre film. It's honestly a pretty crazy phenomena considering how respected the movie once was. Now you might be thinking, nuh-uh, Slush, movies and shows get canceled all the time. But before you go off into a speech about cancel culture and blah blah blah, that's not what I'm talking about. Well, yeah, it's true that a lot of the content we consumed in the 90s and early 2000s wouldn't fly today because it'd be considered insensitive now. And yeah, that's stupid, but I don't think that's why American Beauty lost the respect that it once had. I mean, I'm sure that Kevin Spacey almost having sex with a 16-year-old girl in this movie is going to raise more eyebrows today than it did back then, but believe it or not, that's actually not the reason that most people don't like this movie anymore. It's actually because of the economy. No, I'm serious. Back when American Beauty came out, it was among a wave of art that portrayed the disillusionment of the American dream. Fight Club, Office Space, The Matrix. In the late 90s, the first world was about as good as it could get. It was a time of unprecedented peace and prosperity, and as a result, the American population was grappling with existential dread. Jesus Christ, I can't believe I just said that. I swear I'm not a pretentious film YouTuber. Point is that with time on their hands and having everything that they were supposed to want, people were starting to wonder what their purpose was. That's Lester in the beginning of American Beauty. He has a high-paying job, a house, a family, and yet he's miserable. He doesn't like the life he needs to live to have all those things. And what's the point of having everything if you're still depressed in the end anyways? But by today's standards, Lester seems like a whiny little bitch. We've gone through 2 recessions, 9/11, extreme political division, the plague part 2. I don't know how things are where you live, but I personally would kill to be able to afford a big house in a nice neighborhood in the city.
Please ask me to kill for you.
The point is that it's pretty hard to take this movie seriously when its main message has become so unrelatable to the world today. And that's why critics and audiences have turned on this film so hard. But what if that actually isn't what the movie is about at all? What if the critics hating on American Beauty for its lack of relatability in today's world just never got the movie in the first place? Again, I'd like to remind you that I am not a pretentious film YouTuber, I swear. It's just that personally, I think that the movie isn't actually about disillusionment with the American dream. That's just the vehicle it uses to make its real point, which is about beauty. I mean, duh, come on, it's called American Beauty. It's not like they were being subtle about it. Most of the characters in American Beauty are looking for some form of escape that they just can't seem to find. Lester quits his job, Carolyn has an affair, Jane is vicariously living through Angela, who herself is trying to live up to a false image that people have of her. The Colonel defaults to hardcore discipline and structure to cope with his gay thoughts, but none of these characters can seem to find what they're actually looking for. The only one who seems to have it is Ricky Fitz.
Look, I'm not paying you to do whatever it is you're doing out here.
Fine, so don't pay me.
Ricky, who is portrayed as some sort of enlightened figure, is the only character here who doesn't have a perfect life. He's physically abused by his father, he was unfairly institutionalized, and his mother is so mentally checked out that she may as well have dementia. Yet in spite of all this, he seems to be happy just being himself. And that's because he's the only character that is connected with the beauty behind being alive, which he literally tells us in the infamous bag scene halfway through the movie.
That's the day I realized that there was this entire life behind things. And this incredibly benevolent force that wanted me to know that there was no reason to be afraid.
A lot of people find that scene to be super pretentious, and trust me, I get it. It is pretentious, but I don't think that means that it isn't also powerful. Our world is a beautiful place full of beautiful experiences. It's a privilege to be alive at all, and that benevolent force of beauty is ever present from the day we're born to the day we die. It's the life behind everything. I'm not helping my case with the whole pretentious YouTuber thing, am I? Ricky says that he watches this tape in the movie to remind himself of that truth, because life can be so ugly. He literally needs to remember the beauty of the world to cope with his terrible life. But for other characters, because they already have so much in their lives that they're attached to, it's harder for them to see the beauty behind the veneer. The only character aside from Ricky that ever comes to understand this is Lester, and that only happens at the very end of the movie, when he dies. See, throughout the film, Lester is rejecting the status quo and finding freedom in nostalgia. And while that does seem to make him happier, he's still missing something. His happiness is fickle, it's material, it depends entirely on rejecting the so-called American dream that he was suffering through at the start of the movie. It's only at the very end of the film, after he rejects Angela, who he'd been desiring since the film's first act, that he manages to let go of his selfish desire to live the perfect fantasy life. And it's only then that the truth finally washes over him.
How are you?
I'm great.
He realizes in that moment that his life is great, and it's not because of what he has or what he's given up, but because of everything else around it. It's exactly what he talks about in his final speech and the moments of his death.
For me, it was lying on my back at Boy Scout camp, watching falling stars and yellow leaves from the maple trees that lined our street. And Janie. And Janie. And Carolyn. I guess I could be pretty pissed off about what happened to me, but it's hard to stay mad when there's so much beauty in the world. Sometimes I feel like I'm seeing it all at once, and it's too much. My heart fills up like a balloon that's about to burst. And then I remember to relax and stop trying to hold on to it.
The most important moments of our lives aren't about the things we do or don't have, or the things that we crave or reject. It's about the underlying beauty of being alive. I never saw American Beauty in 1999. I watched the movie for the first time over 20 years too late. But somehow, unlike those critics, I loved it all the same. And I swear it's not because I'm a pretentious YouTuber. It's because even though I'm living in a world that's so much harder to succeed in than Lester's, and that by all accounts, I should hate this movie for the same reasons that the critics do, I couldn't help but find it beautiful anyways. Because above all else, what this movie makes me feel is grateful to be alive.